I used to keep a spare key under the ceramic frog on my mother's porch, back when I still thought I'd need it. I haven't used it in 9 years. Tonight, she used it herself to let herself into my kitchen while I was upstairs putting my son to bed, and by the time I came down, she was already sitting at my table like no time had passed at all, like the silence had been a long weekend instead of 9 years. She'd brought a folder, not flowers, not a card. A folder with a bank's letterhead peeking out of the top, and a smile stretched thin across her face, the same smile she used to wear at church when she wanted people to believe everything at home was fine. She said my name the way you'd test if a floor could hold your weight. Iris! Just that. Like she'd earned the right to say it again simply by showing up. I stood in my own doorway and felt something strange, not anger, not yet. Just an old, familiar instinct clawing back up in me, the instinct to make her comfortable, to smooth things over, to be the reliable one. I almost gave into it, out of habit, before I remembered I don't owe this house my comfort anymore. I put the kettle on anyway. Some habits take longer to unlearn than others, but I didn't sit down across from her yet, not until I understood exactly what was in that folder and exactly what she thought 9 years of silence had earned her. If your own mother showed up after 9 years of silence not to say sorry, but to ask for something, would you let her sit down? Tell me what you would have done. I'll read every comment before I post part 2. I finally opened the folder she'd brought, and the number written across the top wasn't the part that stopped my breath. It was the date beside it, 3 weeks before she ever called. Marcus arrived at 7, wearing a navy blazer he'd pressed twice, carrying a bottle of wine he'd chosen after 20 minutes of standing in a grocery aisle. Iris watched her mother open the door with the smile she used for church greeters, warm enough to photograph, careful enough to mean nothing. "You must be Marcus," Margaret said, and shook his hand like she was testing its temperature. Dinner went fine, in the way that things go fine when everyone has agreed not to say the true thing out loud. Margaret asked Marcus about his job, his family, his college, polite questions, the kind you'd ask a stranger you didn't expect to see again. When he mentioned his mother had raised him alone, Margaret said, "That must have been hard for her," in a tone that somehow made it sound like an explanation rather than a compliment. Iris kept catching small things. The way Margaret refilled everyone's water glass except Marcus's. The way she said his name was a beat too carefully, like she was translating it. Nothing anyone could point to. Nothing anyone could repeat back and call unkind. Dessert came, and with it, the sentence Iris would replay for years afterward. Margaret set down a slice of pie in front of her, not Marcus, her, and said, without looking up, "I just want you to really think this through, sweetheart. Not for you, for all of us. People will look at this family differently. You understand that, don't you?" She said it the way she might mention rain in the forecast. Something to plan around, not something to fight. Marcus's hand found Iris's under the table, steady, unreadable. He hadn't missed it either. "Think about what, Mom?" Iris asked, already knowing the answer, needing to hear her say it. Margaret smiled again at the church smile and reached for her fork. "About what this changes," she said. "That's all." Nobody raised their voice. Nobody said a cruel word out loud. And that was exactly what made it impossible to explain to anyone who hadn't been sitting at that table how a sentence about pie could feel like a door quietly closing, one you wouldn't notice was locked until you tried to walk back through it years later. They were married on a Thursday morning because the courthouse had an opening and neither of them wanted to wait for a Saturday that might never feel right. 9 guests. Marcus's mother in a lavender dress she'd bought for the occasion, crying before the clerk even finished the oath. 2 friends from Iris's office. A coworker of Marcus's who cried harder than anyone and later admitted he hadn't expected to. Iris had sent the invitation to her parents 3 weeks earlier. Cream envelope, her own handwriting on the front. She hadn't expected them to come. She had, if she was honest with herself, expected a phone call, even a short one, even a cold one. There was nothing. Not a card, not a message, not a single missed call sitting unanswered in her phone the way silence sometimes announces itself. Just an ordinary Thursday that came and went for her parents exactly like every other Thursday, while 3 states away their daughter signed her name differently for the first time. She told herself it didn't matter. She had a husband standing beside her who looked at her like she was the only person in the room, and in a way, that Thursday, she was. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at their apartment, the crystal vase she'd registered for at her mother's request, back when there was still a we to plan around. It came back through the mail, taped shut exactly as she'd shipped it, a return-to-sender sticker slapped over her own handwriting. Unopened. Not even out of spite, she realized, turning it over in her hands. Spite would have required someone to look at it first. That was the detail that stayed with her longer than the empty pews had. Not that they'd refused the gift. That refusing it hadn't required a single moment of their attention. Marcus found her sitting at the kitchen table with the box still sealed. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat down across from her and waited, the way he always did, like patience was something you could offer a person instead of words. "They're not coming around, are they?" Iris said. It wasn't really a question. He reached over and took her hand, quiet for a long moment before he answered. "I think," he said carefully, "we should stop waiting for a door we're not sure they ever meant to leave open." Iris looked at the returned box, at her own handwriting mocking her from the label, and understood for the first time that this wasn't a punishment anymore. Punishments end. This was simply what they'd decided she was now, a name they no longer needed to acknowledge, one they could return unopened, like something delivered to the wrong address. It started small enough that Iris almost missed it. A birthday call that went to voicemail and was never returned. A promotion she'd mentioned in a text her mother left on read for 6 days before answering with a single nice word. Nothing dramatic. Nothing she could point to and call cruelty. Just a pattern forming quietly. The way water finds the same crack in a foundation again and again, until one day you notice the crack has become a shape. She didn't decide to start keeping track. She simply noticed, one evening, that she'd begun jotting dates into the back of an old planner the day she called, and it rang out, the day she sent a photo that got no reply. She told herself it was nothing, a habit, the same instinct that made her double-check invoices at work. She didn't examine why a woman who wasn't building a case had started keeping better records of her own mother than of her utility bills. Marcus's mother, Renee, filled the space around the silence without ever mentioning it. She called every Sunday, no agenda, just to ask how Iris's week had gone. She remembered Iris's coworkers by name. When Iris mentioned, almost in passing, that she hadn't heard from her mother in 3 weeks, Renee didn't offer sympathy. She simply said, "Well, I'm calling anyway," and asked about dinner plans, as if the absence of one mother was reason enough for another to show up twice as loudly. It was Renee, humming in the kitchen one Sunday, who finally asked the question Iris hadn't let herself ask. "Why do you write it all down, sweetheart? The dates and things?" Iris looked up from the planner she hadn't realized she'd brought to the table. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm not going to do anything with it." Renee didn't argue. She just studied her for a moment, the way people do when they already suspect an answer the other person isn't ready to hear. "Maybe not yet," she said gently, drying her hands on a dish towel. "But you're not writing it down for nothing, Iris. People don't keep records of things they've already made peace with." Iris laughed it off. But that night, lying awake beside Marcus, she found herself wondering what exactly she thought she was preparing for and who she imagined would ever need to see the proof. Her son was born on a Tuesday morning in March, 7 pounds, quiet in a way the nurses said was rare for newborns, like he'd already decided the world deserved a moment to catch its breath before he made any demands of it. Marcus named him Theo, after no one in particular, which felt right, a name that didn't owe anything to anyone who wasn't in the room. Iris sent the photo to the family group chat that afternoon, the one she was still technically part of, though she'd learned to expect nothing from it. A single word came back from an aunt. Congrats. Nothing from her mother. Not that day. Not the next. 4 days later, the same group chat lit up for hours. Her niece had gotten engaged, and Margaret had responded within minutes, cycling through exclamation points, asking for the story of the proposal in full, sharing 3 photos of the ring from 3 different angles. Iris watched the messages accumulate in real time, holding her son against her chest, and felt something settle in her that wasn't quite anger. It was closer to arithmetic, the quiet, sinking understanding that she had just watched, in real time, exactly how much she was worth by comparison. Her brother called her that night, his voice lower than usual. "I saw the photos," he said. "Theo's beautiful. I'm sorry Mom hasn't," he stopped himself. "It's not fair, I know it's not fair." "You could tell her that," Iris said, not unkindly, just tired. The silence on the line lasted long enough that she had her answer before he spoke again. "I don't want to make things complicated," he said finally. "You understand, right?" She did understand. That was the worst part. She understood completely, and it changed nothing about how it felt to realize that the people who privately agreed with her would never publicly stand beside her. That agreement without action was just another, gentler way of choosing the room she wasn't in. She hung up, looked down at Theo sleeping against her, and thought, he will never know a version of this family that made room for him. And she still didn't know, not yet, whether that was a tragedy or the first mercy either of them had been given. The years that followed didn't announce themselves. They accumulated the way most real change does quietly, in increments too small to notice until you looked back and realized the ground had shifted entirely beneath you. Marcus left his job at 29 to start a small contracting firm. Just him and a used truck at first, then him and 2 employees, then a modest office above a hardware store with his name stenciled on the glass door. Iris kept the books in the evenings after Theo went asleep, spreadsheets open on the kitchen table long after the dishes were done, learning payroll and permits and tax code the way she'd once learned to survive her mother's silences methodically, without complaint, because someone had to. They bought a house in year 4. Small, unremarkable, a maple tree in the backyard that Theo claimed as his on the day they moved in. Nothing about it was designed to prove anything to anyone. That was, Iris would later admit, part of what made it feel so entirely theirs. Renee visited every few months, filling the house with the particular warmth of someone who'd never once needed a reason to show up. She taught Theo to bake bread badly, and then well. She remembered his teachers' names. She asked about Marcus's business the way people ask about something they're genuinely proud of, not something they're politely enduring. Iris stopped checking the family group chat as often. Not out of healing, exactly more out of exhaustion, the way you eventually stop pressing a bruise once you've confirmed enough times that it still hurts. Business grew slowly, then steadily. A second truck. A contract with a local school district that made the community paper a small article, 3 paragraphs, a photo of Marcus in a hard hat shaking hands with a superintendent. Iris almost didn't think anything of it. She'd stopped imagining an audience for their lives a long time ago. But paper trails have a way of traveling further than people intend, especially in towns where everyone still knows everyone, and where her mother, it turned out, had never entirely stopped listening for her daughter's name even after years of pretending she hadn't. It was Marcus who noticed it first, scrolling through the online comments beneath the article one evening. "Someone tagged your cousin," he said quietly, turning the phone toward her. "Looks like it's already made its way back to Millbrook." Iris stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling something she hadn't expected, not hope, not yet. Just the unsettling awareness that the silence she'd built her entire adult life around was, for the first time in years, about to be tested. The message came from her cousin Denise, of all people a woman Iris hadn't spoken to since her own wedding, the one nobody from that side of the family had bothered to attend either. Saw the article about Marcus's company. Your mom asked about it at Easter. Thought you'd want to know. Iris read it twice, standing in her kitchen with Theo's backpack still slung over one shoulder, and felt the strange vertigo of a door she'd sealed shut 9 years ago creaking, faintly, on its hinges. Denise had included more, unprompted, the way people do when they sense they're delivering something significant. Margaret hadn't just asked about the article. She'd asked, specifically, how much a company like that might be worth. Whether contracting businesses like Marcus's usually did well. Whether Iris and Denise had added a small, apologetic emoji, as if she already understood how the words would land was, doing all right for herself these days. Nor is she happy. Nor does she have a family now. Whether she was doing all right, a question shaped exactly like concern, and containing none of it. Iris set her phone down slowly, the way you set down something you suspect might be hot. She thought of the birthday calls that went unanswered. The wedding gift returned unopened. 9 years in which her mother had shown no curiosity about her grandson's name, his laugh, the shape of the life he was growing into, and now, apparently, curiosity had arrived, attached neatly to a number. Marcus found her still standing there when he got home, phone face down on the counter, and read the stillness in her the way he always could. What happened? My mother's asking about the business, Iris said. Not about us, not about Theo, the business. He didn't offer comfort right away. He simply asked the question she hadn't let herself ask aloud yet. After 9 years of nothing, he said carefully, what do you think she actually wants? Iris didn't answer. She was too busy realizing that some part of her, some old, stubborn, 12-year-old part she'd thought she'd finally outgrown, had heard your mom ask about you, and for one humiliating half-second, felt something dangerously close to hope. The truth arrived the way most inconvenient truths did in that family, sideways, through someone who wasn't supposed to be the one telling it. It was Denise again, this time by phone, her voice lower than the last call, careful in a way that made Iris brace before a single word of substance had been said. Your dad's business, Denise said. The hardware store, it's not going well. Hasn't been for a while from what I hear. A pause, the kind that carries its own weight. There's talk they might lose the building. Your mom's been quiet about it, but people notice these things. Iris sat with that for a long moment after the call ended, turning it over the way she used to turn over the returned mail, looking for the part that would finally make sense of everything else. Her father's store had been the family's whole identity, once the thing Margaret introduced herself at church, the thing that made them, in her mother's mind, a certain kind of family. If it was failing, it wasn't just money at risk. It was the entire story Margaret had told about who they were. Suddenly the question about the business, the care she is doing all right for herself, arranged itself into something with a shape. She didn't tell Marcus right away. She sat with it alone first, the way she'd always processed the hardest things quietly, before she trusted herself to say them out loud without flinching. Because the uncomfortable part wasn't the possibility that her mother needed help. It was the specific, humiliating suspicion underneath it that after 9 years of silence, the version of Iris her mother might finally want back wasn't the daughter at all. It was the checkbook. That night, staring at the ceiling long after Marcus had fallen asleep beside her, Iris found herself asking a question she'd spent 9 years avoiding, one she still didn't have the courage to answer. If her mother called tomorrow, not for pride, not for love, but because she had finally run out of other options, would Iris pick up the phone at all? And if she did, which version of herself would answer it? The daughter who still, somewhere beneath all that armor, wanted to be chosen, or the woman who had finally stopped waiting to be? Margaret arrived on a Thursday, unannounced, standing on the porch in a coat too heavy for the weather, as if she'd dressed for a colder version of this conversation than the one she was about to have. Iris opened the door before she could decide whether she wanted to. "Can I come in?" Margaret said. Not a question exactly, more a formality she was performing for herself. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Theo did his homework, where Marcus reviewed invoices, where none of Margaret's absence had ever once been discussed out loud. Margaret folded her hands in front of her the way she used to before Grace, and Iris recognized with a small, cold clarity that her mother had rehearsed this. "Store's in trouble," Margaret said finally. "Your father's too proud to ask, I'm not." She looked up. "I thought, given how well things are going for you and Marcus, you want money," Iris said, not cruelly, just nomming it the way she'd learned to name things over the years plainly without flinching. Margaret's jaw tightened. "I want my family to survive." "We survived 9 years without you," Iris said, and heard her own voice come out steadier than she expected. "You didn't call when Theo was born. You didn't call for our wedding. You returned every card I ever sent you unopened. And now you're here, at my table, asking me to save the thing that always mattered more to you than I did." Silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Margaret's hands trembled slightly around her untouched coffee, the same tremble Iris remembered from childhood, the one that used to make her rush to fix things, smooth things, make herself smaller so her mother could feel steadier. She felt the old pull now, faint but familiar, and made herself sit still against it. "I did what I thought was right," Margaret said quietly. "You did what was easiest," Iris said. "There's a difference." The first time in 9 years, Margaret didn't have a calm, reasonable answer ready. She just sat there, looking for one unguarded moment, less like the woman who'd drawn a line in blue ink and more like someone who hadn't realized, until this exact second, how far past that line she'd actually gone, or how much further Iris might still be willing to make her walk before she'd consider letting her back across it. Iris let the silence sit longer than she needed to. Not out of cruelty. Out of practice, 9 years of learning that the person who speaks first in that family is usually the one who ends up apologizing for something they didn't do. "Not going to give you money," she said finally, and watched something in her mother's face brace for the sentence to end there. It didn't. "But I'll help. On my terms, not yours." Margaret's eyes narrowed, cautious. "What terms?" "You come to Theo's birthday next month. Not because you need something from us that day, because you want to know your grandson. You call me on a Tuesday for no reason, the way Renee does, and you keep doing it, not just until the store's saved and you disappear again." Iris kept her voice level, the way she'd once kept a ledger level, fact by fact. "If you can actually be here, not just need something from here, then we'll talk about the store. Together. As a family that includes Marcus, not around him." Margaret's hands tightened around her coffee cup. For a moment, Iris watched 9 years of practiced composure flicker, something rower moving underneath it, not quite shame, not quite anger, something in between that Iris didn't have a name for and wasn't sure her mother did either. "Asking me to prove myself," Margaret said quietly. "To you." "Asking you to show up," Iris said. "The way I did every year for a long time before I stopped." Silence that followed felt different from every silence that had come before it in that house, not an absence, but a decision waiting to be made. Margaret looked at her hands, then at the doorway toward the living room, where a small pair of sneakers sat by the stairs, a child's backpack slung over the banister, evidence of an entire life that had grown up and moved on without her. "I need to think," Margaret said finally, standing, gathering her coat with hands that hadn't fully steadied. Iris nodded, walked her to the door, and said nothing further, no plea, no softening, no old instinct to make the moment easier for her mother to leave. She closed the door gently once Margaret's car pulled away, and stood there a long moment, unsure herself whether she'd just opened a door back into her mother's life, or simply given her one more thing to walk away from.